We're really thrilled to have this wonderful group of panelists with us to celebrate Earth Day. It's a very special evening for us with a really great array of perspectives on the ecology, on our environment, and a hopeful sort of look at what kind of impact we can make in the time ahead while still understanding the seriousness of what we're facing in today's world. And I want to give special thanks to my very long time and very close friend, Karen Topakian, who is going to moderate tonight's panel. We have been buddies for probably close to 25 years. And Karen, she's a dynamo. She has been board chair for Greenpeace for many years and worked with that organization for a very long time. I really respect all the work that she's done. She's a great thinker, and I know you're going to enjoy her and all of the other panelists that we have here tonight. I talked a little bit with folks in the audience as we were kind of warming up to get started, and I know we've got some long-term Mechanics Institute members here tonight. We've got folks who have been here a few times, and we have people here who are here for the very first time. So if you do have a chance to take the tour that Alyssa was mentioning right afterwards, I think you'll just love our building and all the programs that we have to offer. Take a look at the library, take a look at the chess room, and we'd love for you to become more involved in whatever capacity you're with us here tonight. So I don't want to take any more time except to say thank you, and I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague, Laura, who's going to really be the mistress of ceremonies for this evening's event. Thank you.
Once again, we're very pleased to have everyone here for our conversation on the future of sustainable communities in the Bay Area with environmental activists and innovators who are at the forefront of this field. We'll be discussing and addressing new directions of alternative energy, design concepts and production, and resources for diverse communities. Before we begin, I'd like to invite Quinlin to come up and give us the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is Quinlin Messenger, and through my lineage, I represent the Yaqui and Lakota nations. On behalf of my ancestors and all my relations, may we all hold space to thank and acknowledge the legacy stewards of this land, the Ramaytush Ohlone. In celebration of their contributions and Earth Day, I encourage everyone here today to learn deeply about the legacy of the Ramaytush and to do your part in participating in the Unikin land tax program. Before I continue on with the acknowledgement, I'd like to maybe ask all of us and invite all of us to just take a quick moment to center ourselves in the room, ground ourselves a bit, get your feet comfortable on the ground, there we go, yes, and maybe just close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. Think about how you got here. Did you drive? Where did the materials for that vehicle come from? Who made that road? Where did the materials for that road come from? If you walked, the clothes on your body, the shoes you're wearing, these have all come from somewhere. Take a moment to acknowledge those who might be invisible to supporting the happiness and fulfillment that we all have here. I would also like to give thanks to our shared mother, Mother Earth, for the bounty of life you continue to provide and fulfill. It is through honoring you that I have come to better know my own path and role as a steward of equity and practitioner of design justice. Thank you for the vision you have given me and the vision you have given each of us, if we choose to see it. In honor of this planet we call home, I ask everyone here today to reflect on your own role in the ecosystems you inhabit, and to continue to ask yourself, What is it that I am and should be responsible for? May we always remember that we are not apart from nature, we are a part of it. Aho.
Thank you, Quinlin. So this is Earth Day coming up. It's also Earthquake Day. The earth in all its expressions. So, in terms of a dedication and the expressions of the earth, and also how we express the earth, I'm very pleased and honored to welcome Aileen Cassinetto, who's a Sen Mateo Poet Laureate, to give a dedication on our Earth Day program.
Everyone, thank you all for joining us tonight. Last year, I co-edited the anthology Dear Human at the Edge of Time, poems on climate change in the United States with Dr. Louisa A. Laureate and NCA 5 chapter lead, Dr. Jeremy S. Hoffman. We released the book in September as a companion to the 5th National Climate Assessment, which is a congressionally mandated annual report on climate change risks, impacts, and responses in the U.S. NCA 5, which was released in November, was groundbreaking for many reasons, but mainly because it is the most inclusive and equitable NCA report to date. Among others, it assessed the vulnerability of Indigenous, BIPOC, and LGBTQ communities. It also looked at climate solutions through a social equity lens and featured work by artists to advance the national conversation around climate change. Our anthology, Dear Human at the Edge of Time, features poems by over 70 scientists and poets. We presented it at the American Geophysical Union's annual meeting last year. And just the other day, UC Berkeley hosted the conference Dear Human at Future's Edge as a way of expanding conversations around climate futures through science and creativity. We also partnered with Poets for Science in developing the Dear Human interactive microsite. I think you can see the postcards around you. Please visit dearhuman.poetsforscience.org to share your voice or write your thoughts on the back of the postcard and upload it using the QR code. This is all to say that alongside the language and methodology of climate science, we also need the language of poets, which is one of witness and community. My own poem in the anthology was prompted by an article in the journal Nature about krill. It talks about how connected we are to each other and how much the world has changed, but that what matters most is saving what is here and now. Here be dragons, cetaceans, pink crustaceans, dear humans, and a book of remembrance. The cavalry's here, loud as thunder, wild and wiser, like a nobility of beasts. Catch the light where X marks the spot. And if anyone asks, this poem is a map that lapses daily. Sees clearly 2 sea dragons spinning snout to snout, and pods of cetaceans fueled by clouds of pink crustaceans. The shape of the Arctic is less solid now, fading into swaths of milky blue, and above us, dying stars consuming their weight in gas and dust. We're a throbbing mass of reef and limbs, like whale food or swollen coastlines. Do me a kindness and repeat this worship of humans, their book of remembrance, a cadence of heartbeats, more than 1,000 a minute, short-winged and foraging for flowers which bloomed much earlier. If I could, I would gather this shimmer, this wonder of stars. Stop the world from burning, the seas from rising. Be the cavalry or a reliance of stewards. Remember what it means to love you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aileen. This was gorgeous, and I hope everyone will go to Dear Human site and also compose something to contribute to this wonderful website and to our vision of the world. So today we're going to have three presentations with each speaker, and then we'll bring everyone back for a conversation moderated by Karen Topakian and then your audience. So I'd first like to introduce Quinlin Messenger, founder and director of Just Design. As a design, justice, and equity steward, Quinlin's leadership and creativity identity is rooted in his African American, Native American, and Jewish heritage. He channels and honors these legacies through design justice, an awareness and healing modality that is at the core of his practice, engaging communities and projects with a sensitivity and a focus towards healthy living, social and environment empowerment, and legacy cultivation. With over 15 years' experience working with underserved communities, Quinlin believes that design is a tool for social and environmental transformation. So please welcome Quinlin Messenger.
It's me again. Great to be here with you all. And as was mentioned earlier, I come from a pretty dynamic background. So in thinking about my ancestors here, let's make sure that this is working. We have good to go. We can imagine the next slide. Keep imagining. Oh, maybe it wasn't turned on. Oh, there's the laser. Well, while we're waiting here, it's great to see the breadth of faces in the room. I've been in conversations with the Mechanics Institute for the past few months now. Been really honored to be welcomed into the legacy of this place, given how long the Mechanics Institute has been here, and also in supporting the core mission of the common folk and making sure that we have resources to live a life of fulfillment. So with that, I'm Quinlin Messenger. These are my elders. So my grandmother Ethel May and Leroy were two black folk from Clarksdale, Mississippi, who raised my dad's family during the height of the civil rights movement. Below is my mom's parents, my grandmother Judith, who was a Russian Jew who immigrated to the States, fell in love with the ways of the Lakota, was adopted into the Lakota Nation, and facilitated my own adoption when I was 13 years old. And my grandfather Jesus was a war vet, but first and foremost, he was an indigenous Yaqui Indian, so indigenous Mexican. So I represent a wide swath of different perspectives and experiences. And because of this, we were always in conversations about justice, but also injustice and what our family faced broadly through our experiences. But from my conversations with all of my elders who were activists in their own right, it was really conversations around understanding and acknowledging that we are all human and that is something that we all undoubtedly share in common. So this is very much where social justice plays a key role in my perspectives. This is a great quote that my grandmother Judith shared with us as we were growing up. We grew up on the land in northern New Mexico at the Tecosha Institute, which was founded by my grandmother 50 years ago as an artist in the spiritual retreat center. And from a very young age, she was always reminding us that we are all children of the same mother, being Mother Earth. On the land, we have a sweat lodge, which we rebuild every 2 to 3 years through traditional techniques that we have learned through our adoption into the Lakota tribe. I've had the honor and privilege of acting as a firekeeper and waterman during our sweat ceremonies. And when you are in the sweat and the hot stones come from the fire and the water is poured on them and the drumming and the singing and the sage is with you, you can't help but be very aware of your place in the world and what that might mean for you. But also, it gets very hot and can be very intense, and that is with reason. It is with putting us in touch with the suffering of others and the suffering of our shared mother. It brings about an opportunity to really acknowledge what your role is going to be. And in this way, this is where the health and well-being for all plays a key role in my personal perspectives in design and being an advocate for environmental justice. So what does that mean for my practice? I founded Just Design about 4 or 5 years ago, and we are a collaborative platform, really with a focus on sort of broadening the awareness of what projects can and should be responsible for. We have 3 ways of working: Just Design, which is focused primarily on the built environment, architecture primarily, but also with an integration of sustainability. And then we have Just Collaborate, which is a network of trusted leaders, experts, and thinkers from various fields that we pull in a very focused way from project to project, and Just Act as our emerging nonprofit arm to meet the need that we continue to face working on projects in underserved communities that lack resources to be realized. So Just Act will hopefully become the catalyst to help in that way. So just a few more slides here. One of the ways that we approach our work is being very conscientious of the sort of structures and the systems that we are working within, that there are usually silent, invisible, sometimes very apparent ways of control that might be operating in an environment. So by helping to elevate awareness and understanding of these contexts, we can start to open access and create new pathways for understanding with the communities and clients we work with. And this is really with an eye on providing tools and facilitating agency for the people that we are working with. In that, my operations director always is chasing me for saying this, but our goal is to not be needed anymore. We are really here to help work hand in hand with communities and partners to equip them with the tools to do the work that we believe needs to be done. So how does that show up? We've worked very closely with the East Palo Alto community here locally. We helped to realize a youth art and music center with the EPA community, and this group here in particular was very formative in my own trajectory within architecture. And because of these experiences, I actually broke off and started my own practice. But it was also because we realized we believed in a future where an underserved community could have the healthiest building, not just for themselves, but for the community at large. This project is completely net zero, actually it's net positive energy. There's energy going back into the grid. There's water reclamation that's happening off of the roofs and off of the site, which actually allowed the project to bypass a moratorium that had been placed on development relative to water rights. We were able to prove that this project was actually supplying and gathering more water than it needed. And lastly, this is a youth art and music center, so it's with an eye on supporting the future leaders of the world and giving them a scaffold to empower their own leadership. We've also worked very closely with communities relative to cultivating legacy. So we're currently working with the San Diego community to develop a new civil rights center on a community college campus. So this is one of the groups that we met with. These folks right here are the descendants of the original founders of the school. This fellow over here, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, is my partner. And this lady here you can't see in the foreground has become a very close friend of ours and is sort of the cultural bearer of the community. But my heart and wholeheartedly my spirit goes out to thanking this group for helping us design and realize a new future for this facility, one in which the voices and the lessons of the past are present in the current to give us a new landscape for the future. And then lastly here, relative to the East Palo Alto community, this work is the core focus of this work also is to support the next generation. So through our engagement with these students, this was to design a new digital learning center on their campus. we simply just asked them before we started the community engagement with them, where do you want to do this session? Like, where do you feel comfortable? And they said, let's go outside. Let's get under a tree. So when we asked that question, it kind of gave us pause because we were designing a digital learning center for esports gaming, which that existing on a middle school campus is a bit of a question, right? Like, esports tends to be very dark and shut off from the world, predominantly males and men, and lots of Cheetos. It's like something that is like the most unhealthy environment in many cases, but this was a thought of it living on a middle school campus. So we really worked closely with this group, the community, and the campus itself to realize what a new sort of digital learning center might be, and integrating and inviting nature to be present within the spaces through courtyards, and using new methods of managing light control through highly sophisticated sort of systems, but also very analog with like ropes and cables for students to sort of shape their environment. First and foremost, the building was seen as a steward and a teacher for Mother Earth. So just lastly here, you will see on the tables the Black Experience in Design. I encourage everyone to take some time to flip through some pages and have a read. This is a canon of knowledge that was assembled by these incredible humans right here after the Floyd murder, and it focuses and centers Black voices from a wide range of design perspectives. And I continue to draw inspiration from it daily and always find something new. I'd like to thank Gregory Fisher, my partner in all things just, for continuing to believe in what we are doing. I would also like to thank this sexy guy right here. Prince, you have been a champion for me since day one. Not just my love for the color purple, but for being so you, and just owning it and loving it, and showing us all that that is possible. And lastly, many thanks to my family and the support system that I have, that my wife continues to show up in every way she can to support me in this endeavor, and the legacy that we are responsible for our beautiful daughter, Kaya. So with that, the future can be just. Design it.
Thank you, Quinlin, for that inspiration. Our next guest speaker is Lara Lebeiko, who is with Methuen Landscape Architecture. Lara is a designer at Methuen working on park design, affordable housing, and resilience projects in the Bay Area. She has a background in business and consulting and a master's in landscape architecture from the University of Southern California, where she focused on urban ecosystems and biodiversity considerations in site design. So please welcome Lara Lebeiko.
Hello, thank you. I have tea because I have a cold that won't go away. It's not contagious, don't worry, but it just seems so dark in here. If anyone gets sick later, I have no idea why. On another note, so I'm going to talk a little bit similarly and differently than everything. This is exciting to see all the threads going through. As it said, I have a background in business development and consulting, so I came into landscape architecture later, and to see the awakening of how much I learn about land and the disconnect of how are we going to be sustainable in a planet where no one learns this stuff unless you go back to school as an adult. Children are learning it now, but there's just a lot to be desired. So talking about signs of life. Question, does anyone know what these are images of? Hey, there we go. That's a sad pause, right? This is our planet, and we don't recognize the majority of what we're consisted of. So this was a project I did in grad school, and we started looking at oceans. And the more that we looked at them, you hear in climate and sustainability, oh, we have to save our oceans. We don't even recognize them. How are we going to save them? And not about guilt, but just a recognition of, hey, it'd be nice to learn a lot about that. So we learned more than anyone needs to know, casually, not really. I won't get into the details of what we learned. But we broke out the oceans and discovered the difference between how does water behave in the Pacific, how does water behave in the Atlantic, and what does that mean? And then at the bottom, we developed kind of a matrix of what are the extremes. The blue along the bottom is just the extremes of ocean behavior by different metrics, like salinity, acidity. But when you start to break out the characteristics, we started to realize, oh, so what I do here affects the ocean in this way. So to the question, how can we be sustainable without understanding that how our world is sustained? So as we said, I work with Ms. Thune, which is an architecture firm. We have 3 offices. Pardon me while I stare at the screen because, as we said, it's a quick shift in pinch hitting. We have several disciplines. We're quite collaborative, which we just won an award last year with AIA for design. And I will say, since I'm new and I don't have any interest in winning you over, I will say it's amazing how collaborative it is. And I do think that, architecture is historically, right, very ego-driven, and this is quite about the design and about the interest of the well-being of people and the planet. Lots of awards. The big one, I'm going to show you a couple that have won some awards. And then I'll get into the thread again of my own personal life. So here we go. Talking about the life in water. Another one. Does anyone, I'm guessing you do because you're at an Earth Day event. Does anyone know what watershed they live in? Do you know what it looked like before your building was there? So again, looking at what's here, what's literally beneath my feet. How can I learn more about what that is and what I do? I mean, do you really sit there and think about oh, there it is, it's underneath me. So this is a building we designed called Casa Adelante. It just won an AIA Code Award. There's information about it everywhere, so you're welcome to glance around it. It's beautiful. It's in the Mission. Surely you'll see it if you drive by. I can't miss it. It's stunning. This is a walkway that goes through there, and something that's interesting about it, it's very subtle. So there are a million reasons it's incredibly sustainable. There's a lot of electricity used. There's great sustainable behavior, but underneath it, we did research and looked at what happened before we built there. And this is actually an illustration on the wall of the watershed that was there before, Mission Creek. So we actually excavated, if you look at Iowa Point, number 9, underneath there, instead of building, we actually dug out the fill that was put into the Mission area, district area, excavated and put in gravel and more permeable soils. So that instead of just living with what we had, we went back to what was already there, dug it out, and it actually is performing amazing for flooding because it makes it so that the water can go back to where it wants to go anyway. So, different example, life on land. Does anyone know who this is? There's so many cute faces right now. This is a saltwater harvest mouse. It lives in, it's in the bay, and I think there are 2 different types, but we're looking at the one that's up in the Sphinx Square up in Richmond. And we were doing some work up there, so we're down here at the bottom, up there, above the bridges is Richmond. And this little guy lives in this chaos country. We got the Chevron refinery, we got the bay, we got a landfill, we got some waste processing facilities, and you've got a water processing facility. And in the middle of it all are these creatures that we don't even see right beneath our feet and around us. So we even made a diagram looking at all the different creatures who live right here behind the scenes. You can't quite see the silhouettes, but there are buildings back there. And again, the more that we uncovered as we looked at all these ways of so the whole project is about how to protect from sea level rise in the middle of all this chaos. We want to make sure the humans and the mice don't drown. And it's a historically quite complicated neighborhood. The neighborhoods are obviously incredibly redlined. So we have this levee design. We work with the U.S. Army Corps to make this levee, which is the pink space. And it's a very oscillating type of design where in places where you have a lot of space, we can make a wide space for habitat. And on the other side, you can make a wide space for parks, for amenities, for walking. This is the final design of the first phase. It's with SFPRA. There's a big report. The pink line is the insertion of a levee. But as you can see, all these green spaces are the addition of habitat. And the idea that these places can coexist is quite complex because you can't just go in and say, hey, little mouse, we have to do construction for 10 years. Can you hang on and just chill? No big deal. And go to all those birds and say, go eat somewhere else. You've got plenty of space. You could go to Oakland. So the complexity of how to construct something without totally disrupting the things you're trying to protect and the neighborhoods you're trying to protect is quite difficult. In the end, it will look like this. It's actually funded, just received more funding from the U.S. Army Corps and many others. And again, we've got the slope on the left and the right, and we also did a ton of amazing collaborative outreach with the community, extensive, a whole other story for a different day. And then there's the life in us. So back to me. Does anyone recognize this little book? You are right. We're friends now. So this is a soldier beetle, and they like to eat aphids. But they seem to prefer aphids on native plants. So this is the story of my garden. On the right, it's sort of, I call it a chaos garden. It's seen some stuff. So on the right, on the left, is what it used to look like on a good day. And on the right was the day that my landlord decided that he would hire a handyman to clean up. And he stripped out everything, but he left the little aeoniums and the things that everyone has that are very typical, but all of the native plants he tore out, because he didn't know. And how could he know? It's not his job to know. It's not his job to represent all of society and all the wrongs we've done, to recognize the things that exist. But these are the things that I see, and I know live in my house. There's slugs that are processing the soil. You've got soldier beetles taking care of the bugs. And then you've got these pollinator-friendly plants like buckwheat that make the bees look crazy. If you want to see some crazy bees, I'll have you over. But the thread is that we expect to be sustainable, but someone's going to go in and tear up their lawn. Someone's going to go in and tear up the things that they don't realize. We're going to pour out water and not know what happens after it leaves us. We're going to throw out trash and not really know what happens when it goes to that landfill. We're going to drive past places and not know who lives there. And that's okay. That's the world we've all inherited. But the question is, what do we see? What can we know? What animals, what creatures, what species can we know? Because the people who lived here before us, they knew those names because it was their family. And it's our family. And if you break something and you don't care about it, there's no tears. If someone hurts something you love, it changes everything. So guilt isn't always a good motivator when you could love it. So, that's it. Thank you.
Lara, thank you for appealing to our consciousness and our conscientiousness. All right, our next guest speaker is Dustin Mulvaney. Dustin is a professor in the Environmental Studies Department at San Jose State University, one of the first 6 interdisciplinary environmental study programs in the United States, which was founded as a result of the first Earth Day in 1970. Dustin's work focuses on the social and environmental dimensions of commodity chains and production systems, where he studies questions about emerging technologies, socio-ecological change, and environmental justice. The areas of expertise Dustin works on include solar energy commodity chains, and some of this is synthesized in his book, Solar Power: Innovation, Sustainability, and Environmental Justice, which is available in the back. So please welcome Dustin Mulvaney.
Well, pleased to be with you today to celebrate Earth Day. Earth Day, famous on our campus at San Jose State, in our department, as he's mentioned. They buried a car, and then he said he bought a brand new car for the Scottists. Bought a brand new car, rolled it to campus, buried it, and then the next year they exhumed it, crushed it into a square with the hopes that it would be a cornerstone of a public transit facility in San Jose, which they still don't have. So we have a long ways to go. But we're making a lot of progress I didn't see any rivers on fire in the headlines. So 54 years, we're doing some things a little better. We're breathing cleaner air. I ride up on the Caltrain. I saw the beautiful new electric trains parked there. So we're not going to be spewing diesel even on our public transit. So this is all great news. 34 of the last 41 days, California has produced over 100% renewable energy. That's a big change. In the middle of the day, just when it was sunny, and we still haven't turned off the natural gas power plants that we need on for reliability, so we're exporting that to other states. But that's a tremendous shift in our energy system. But this shift is going to pose challenges for us, because we're moving from a subterranean energy regime where we poke holes in the ground and we dig tunnels to pull up those energy resources that are very dense and very rich, to a very diffuse energy system where we have these collectors on the surface of the earth that we need to collect the sun rays and collect the wind, or maybe we gotta get a little geothermal. So this is our challenge. It's wonderful to have 100% renewable energy on the grid in the middle of the day, and we'll have it for longer periods, hopefully, as we move forward. But the way we are building these solar facilities on the landscape today are going to pose challenges, because look at these landscapes that we have. Particularly because the land that we're seeking for solar energy development is often land that is in conservation by default because it had no other uses historically. Right? These are landscapes that are managed often by the Bureau of Land Management and places like that. And we, as a species, I think, have a bad opinion about deserts often. Right? We even say things that we don't like are food deserts. We talk about food deserts. So we kind of like repeat these ways of thinking about landscapes that were historically hostile or unproductive. But now we're seeing them differently. And now we have new resource conflicts that might emerge. And I want to push us to think about better ways of building a solar-powered society. So here's one of the challenges. So you can see here, this is a project in Desert Center, California, and this is the Desert Sunlight Project. This is a picture taken in 2010 when it was under 2011 when it was under construction. And as you can see, it is a pretty intensive land use change that's occurring here. You can see desert washes in the background there, and they're sending big grading trucks out here. This is a 10 square mile project that at the end of the day will have 9 million solar panels in it. It'll be the largest project in California. Still is today, until this is one that's been from online in Kern County, they'll be a little bit bigger. So these pressures have led people who've been thinking about the desert for a long time and how important it is and how beautiful it is and how many animals live there to feel a lot of pressure, because we've had millions of acres being sought after by solar and energy industries that want access to cheap transmission. That's the story we hear today. Everybody needs transmission lines to power society. And unfortunately, it turns out a lot of our public lands are open spaces with a lot of access to transmissions that are very attractive. So I want to solar development. So I want us to think about how can we live with solar power in ways that's more compatible? Are there ways that we can live with an energy system that we can cohabitate with other animals, other species and such? And other species and such. This, I would argue, is not a sustainable way of building an ecosystem that you want animals to move across. Right? You are potentially trapping animals across. So here's bighorn sheep, an animal that lives in mountain areas, comes down in valley areas, migrates across the landscape, being isolated because we're building larger and larger facilities that are fragmenting its habitat. But what if we started to build systems that look like this? Right, we're worried about our cities being too hot. Maybe we could bring our power closer to load. Here, this is a parking garage, a parking structure, solar canopies in France. They have a law that requires every parking lot to now be covered with solar panels. Let's do this in California. We need more power closer to our cities. We need more shade, right, as our cities get warmer. Let's think about building cities that are sustainable, that are able to both generate. I mean, it's an amazing technology. It's the only technology you could live under that generates electricity. If you can find me another technology you can live under that generates electricity, let me know, because I don't see it. We are building bigger and bigger warehouses. And unfortunately, this is not a common scene. If you look at, you just drop by like an airport or something like that and zoom out on your Google Maps, LAX, Phoenix, Las Vegas, you'll see empty rooftops everywhere. And we should be thinking about these as resources, especially if we're squandering other resources in our effort to build as cheaply as possible. This is the EPA. The EPA actually has been thinking about this for a while. This is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. This is a program called Repowering America's Land, where they've identified many, many acres more, or many times over, the amount of electricity space that we would need for solar power in things like brownfields, Superfund sites that have had legacy contamination, abandoned landfills, abandoned mine areas. For California, they found California on a typical day is going to use maybe 30 gigawatts of power or something like that. They found on the order of 400 gigawatts worth of land available that fit these characteristics. And that's not including abandoned agricultural land that's contaminated with too much salt. We have a lot of space available. We just need to build these systems and connect these things. So here's some more ideas, I think, that get us to these win-win scenarios. We call them in a paper we wrote called techno-ecological synergies. How do we develop these technologies in a synergistic way with the ecologies they're found in? So, saving water with photovoltaic aqueducts, photovoltaics, covering some water bodies, like maybe it's a wastewater treatment facility that's got some ponds. Bringing pollinators back into our solar farms might be another way. And just a sidebar, land use change from solar development is a leading cause of pollinator loss in the American West over the last couple of years, partly because of important habitat that's lost in the American West. So agrivoltaics, spacing those solar panels out just a little bit to let some agriculture grow. These are really win-win scenarios. So kind of 3 R's to leave us with here, to think about how, or what are the principles that should guide where we think about developing solar. We can use solar to restore landscapes. We could put these on landscapes that might be invasive grasses or things like that and do grassland restoration. We've seen actually that you can increase the carbon in the soils below, so another win-win scenario. Reclamation. This is a picture of a solar farm that's built on an abandoned mine that's no longer used, doesn't have the same habitat qualities anymore because it's pretty compacted and things like that. Another win-win scenario. And then here you see a solar farm on a Superfund site that's got contaminated groundwater underneath. They're using some on-site pumps to clean that water, but at the same time they're using that facility to generate electricity to export onto the grid. So we have a lot of opportunities. We just need to think about where we put these solar facilities in ways that benefit both our climate objectives to solve our climate change challenge, but also to think about biodiversity. And I think that's our challenge, is we've now, to some extent, reduced many of our problems to be just about climate, and we've lost these other connections to the world that we really need for a habitable planet to share with other species, our species kin, and things like that. So, solar panels on cats is another strategy. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, that was ingenious. Now we're going to bring everyone together to be in conversation with our moderators. I'd like to introduce Karen Topakian. Karen is the founder of Topakian Communications, is a writer, speaker, communications consultant, facilitator, and social change activist. Karen worked for more than 40 years in the nonprofit sector, including as the executive director of the Agape Foundation Fund for Nonviolent Social Change, and also as an anti-nuclear campaigner at Greenpeace. And some of her clients include the San Francisco Green Film Festival, the Women's Building, the National Immigration Law Center, the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, California Rural Legal Assistance, just to name a few. So please welcome Karen Topakian and our guest speakers back to the front.
Thank you all. We've been carefully instructed how to sit in these chairs so we don't tip over. So hence the kind of tentative way we're sitting here. And if one of us tips over, Alyssa said she would catch us. I'm not sure where she is right now, but she's in the back and she will catch us.
I got you.
I am so delighted to be here at the Mechanics Institute with you all. I've been a member for many years, and I'm a member because of Kathy Bella, who told me about the Mechanics Institute and introduced me to the place, and then I became a member and a donor and have attended many events here and used to spend, and still do, a lot of hours writing and working in the library. So I'm so grateful to be part of a panel here, since I've attended so many events here in the past. And I'm more than excited to be with these three people, whom I've only met on Zoom up until today, and now I'm even more impressed by them, and I have lots of ideas and thoughts, and I'm sure you do too. I would like to say my brain is full, but it isn't yet, because I have more things I want to know. So I'm going to start by asking a few questions, and then you all, as you're sitting here, if you think of questions you want to ask, there'll be an opportunity to do so. So please start thinking about them now. So my first question is, and it's to all three of you, and you can answer in any order you prefer, what should we be excited about in your field? What's the thing that really grabs your gut that's so exciting in the field you're in right now? And whoever wants to go first can do so.
I'll start. I ended with those ideas that people are experimenting with, and I just see a lot of people thinking about these things now. Just for many, many years, people were not engaging in these alternatives. It was all about how to build big fields, how to get things out on the ground, and now people are starting to experiment with what those things look like. Yet now the challenge is getting the utilities and the solar developers and the public to actually want these things out there. So I think there's a lot of things that have happened. Good.
Lara or Dustin, too?
I feel like I really overlap. For landscape specifically, I think it's just exciting to. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Am I talking to myself? Hello.
Try mine.
Hello.
Oh, there you are.
For landscape specifically, I think it's exciting just to see that we are starting to have influence, because a lot of times the built environment has been architecture driven, and I will say the architects that work with me are so adorable, because they're like, what should we do? We look to you first so that we can think about the environmental impact and the soil impact and the community impact, and it's much more cohesive. And so when you're doing community outreach and whatnot, and you're thinking about habitat corridors, it's just a much more beautiful and sustainable outcome. So I think it's exciting to see the landscape has more important influence.
Nice. It's an interesting question relative to sort of the architecture sphere. I'm not sure if many of you have looked at photos of how architecture used to be done, like 30 or 40 years ago, maybe even less than that. It's usually like these giant warehouses of only white men, like bent over drawing desks, just drawing all day long. And my question is always like, well, if those are the voices and the people designing it, what about the other voices that should be in that room? And I'm seeing that shift happen more and more now in the industry. It's interesting though, because at the same time, there's also these opposing forces Within the sort of DEI sphere in design, there's also de-investment that's happening now. But I'm excited to see that there are other folks like me who look like me doing this work. And partnering also, it's kind of a scale thing too, right? It's like we've got these big monolithic design groups who have long-term sort of trajectory and legacy, but then small minority-owned businesses are trying to find a way in. And I'm seeing more and more openness and availability to partner so that we can scale these efforts. So that's something too that I'm super excited about.
That's wonderful, and I should have said this before we started. When we first started working on this together, one of my strong beliefs was this is not a doom and gloom opportunity. This is not a time for us to sit here and say that wring our hands and there's nothing that can be done. These people are showing us there are things to be done. They have done them. There's more to do to help us address the issue of climate change in an innovative and ecologically sound way. So I hope that that comes forward in the whole presentations and the questions and answers. So that's why I'm not going to ask, like, what's the worst thing that's ever happened? Because that's not going to be inspiring and engaging for us. But I am going to ask, how do we make sustainable design normative? How do we make that be the default setting, not the extra setting? Is it education? Is it policy change? Is it who's in the room when it happens? What will get us to have sustainable design considered normative?
I have a few opinions.
Go for it.
I mean, I think design is a reflection of the asker of the design. And I can go out and tell you what would be an incredibly sustainable design, but you have to want to pay me to do it because I have to, eat. And so, for example, the North Richmond work we did, it's gorgeous, it's amazing, it's so sustainable, it's so thoughtful. We didn't do that design. I mean, we did it, but it came out of 50 plus years of extensive, deep community work where the oppressed fought the oppressors over and over, and they died, and they were poisoned. I mean, it's not like a love story. Like, it's Taylor Swift's not going to sing about it. So I think, of the idea, like, I want to say sustainable design is the future, but I think it comes from the community fighting and asking for it, and not always from the designer. I think, I'm not saying that isn't it, but I think it's really important to recognize we are a reflection of the master that we serve, and that is whoever is putting out a bid and wanting design. That's not my final dark answer, I just think it's important to realize.
Well, no, and maybe to riff off of that, because I think it's kind of interesting, and I'm curious if both of you have maybe encountered this in your line of work, but I think the normative part of it, or maybe integrating it into the ways in which it can and maybe should be done, is there needs to be a degree of accountability. I think a lot of times people sort of talk the talk, but when they are asked to walk the talk, it's a very different situation, especially in like, sort of institutional thinking, whether it's museums or schools or things that have been around for a long time and kind of have this history of doing things a certain way. So that's something that our group has really been striving to do is to work with teams to establish accountability frameworks so that, and those frameworks can shift. Throughout the evolution of a project, we might have equity indicators, or we might have belonging indicators, we might have regenerative indicators, but it starts to establish a framework to keep your ambition and intention sort of in check. And I'm seeing more and more that by implementing that, it's not something that just gets like quote unquote value engineered. That's when like something's too expensive and you can't afford it, so you just don't do it. Usually what happens is landscape gets chopped in half, which is, as we know, our bee friends and our ecologies that we need to respect. But then it's also the other sort of features or qualities of the building that might really reach out and invite somebody in or be welcoming. So I think that those accountability measures can also be a way to start to integrate this.
And then the zoning requirements of your community. You go to your community
Yes.
board and you say, I want this, and then they require it, and
Yeah.
the accountability comes.
Yeah, I think, in thinking about specifically the solar deployment piece and like how do we get sustainable renewable energy, right? Renewable energy, in some ways means exploding that category of solar power, because I think, at least in my book, Solar Power, I say that solar power gets the green halo effect. What is the green halo effect? That is when you say, oh, this technology, it has a halo, and what does that mean? It means because of this one characteristic of being low carbon, all the characteristics of it are good. So we need to start differentiating good. This is no longer alternative energy. This is mainstream energy. It's 100% of it. We're powering the afternoons with this energy. So now we have to really, it's hard work to be critical and say, this is good, this is bad, but we need to start differentiating good from bad, and sometimes that means talking to communities, because, again, some people live in these landscapes, some people are aware of these ecosystems, some people have been out there during the super bloom and understand like how complex this ecosystem is, and you need to listen to them, because often these decisions are being made by people who actually don't know or view that system as unproductive and not working for humans, which is, I think, part of the paradigm shift here too. We have to move away from our very anthropocentric way of dealing with climate change, which is just build all this technology and it'll substitute for the energy we have, to something that's more integrative and more holistic, and thinking about all the dimensions of challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, I love that. And something else that came to mind, which was inspired by both of you, is that I don't think all of these sort of strategies and ideas that we're talking about are exclusive to our fields. It's a shift in mindset, right? So like, Laura, you talked about your garden. As of 2 years ago when my daughter was born, my mother-in-law started our first garden. And I'd always dreamed of feeding the family out of the garden. But now, we don't buy the majority of our food from the grocery store. And it's like, it's just that small thing that made me start to realize, oh, well, what are the other things that I've kind of just fallen into the norm of doing? So I just wanted, I guess, to put that out there so that some of what we're saying is like, it's a scale thing again, right? It's like, I think we all have tools and resources that we can draw from. It's just a matter of being able to sort of see them or, get out of our own way.
One of the things that resonates with me is what you just said, Dustin, about it's no longer alternative energy. So maybe what we should do is target fossil fuel-based energy with the negative connotation. And that green energy, which for me would be solar, wind, and geothermal probably, that those should be the standard and the others should be the anomaly. And actually, in my perspective, gone completely. But let's label them for what they are, right? They're the damaging energy versus the regenerative energy. And it makes me think about the ways in which we conduct our own lives and how we make choices in our own lives and how society makes its choices. So that leads me to the next question, which is, where do you see the most potential for change in your work? Is it through your clients? Is it through people? Is it through demand in the community? Is it through policymakers? Where's the most potential for change?
Well, I'll just go on the desert story here again, which is that when you bring people out to the desert, first you ask people about the desert, whatever. When you bring people out to the desert areas to appreciate, what lives there, the geology, the rocks, everything about it, people are inspired to say, oh, this is actually an important place that we shouldn't be sacrificing because we have an energy consumption problem and we want solar to be as cheap as possible. So I think that I'm hopeful that as we can show people what we could potentially lose if we don't do this correctly, that they will see that these things are very valuable answers. We're in a little bit of a knowledge deficit, I would say, and appreciation for these systems that people are just not familiar with. And again, I think there's cultural, historical baggage on deserts and things like that. But every time I talk to someone who's been out there, their world has been shifted. They've never seen that landscape before. I think that has a lot of potential.
Great question. one of the things that immediately comes to mind to me is sort of thinking about how knowledge and tradition was, and is maintained, right? Traditionally, it was through story. It was sort of the cultural bearers of communities would share about the history of the place or their experience. And as we continue to advance through technology, and I think storytelling is an actual vital component to these conversations. I think that what you brought up earlier about labeling is quite interesting, and Dustin, this might be a longer conversation for you and I later. But, you know, how do I say this? So, what are the stories around solar that we have become accustomed to, right? But then what are the other stories that are happening behind the scenes that we might not see or know? And how relevant are those stories to its future, right? And I'm also reflecting on architecture. It's like, oh, we're using green mixes in concrete. We're making concrete healthier. Well, yes, but we're also mining the earth and pulling all these things. There's other ways of doing it. So it's sometimes like, what are the stories that we're carrying, and maybe taking stock of that and being mindful of sort of the implications that they can have without questioning them. So maybe there's something there. I don't know if that's what came to mind.
I guess I would say that the thing that's an interesting curveball that I am curious to see what happens is the value of labor. In Japanese car history, you know, in factories, if anyone saw a problem on the line, they were entitled to pull the string, pull the cord and say something's wrong, and everyone stops and fixes it. And in landscape and land management, Department of Forestry makes a choice, and God help you if you want to say anything, and so it trickles down from there. Or in other ways, you know, the city says we're going to build a thing, and the developer says we're doing it, and whatever. But when you touch the land, the person who touches the land is the least valuable and the most impactful, and they do have this wealth of knowledge. You know, they'll say, don't put that there, it's never going to live, but you're like, oh, it's going to live. But so I don't have a prediction, but I think it is, I see it brewing, and I'm curious to see how it all culminates, because I think the voice of the land comes from the voice of the laborer, and I'd like to see what happens.
Very good perspective on that, because especially since a move to a just transition would involve labor having a voice, whatever kind of labor that is, in the voice in this. I'm going to skip ahead to a question about, do we need to change hearts, minds, and behaviors, or is it systems that need changing, or all of that? And if you felt like you've already answered it, that's fine, and I'll move on to the next question.
I think it's a yes and. I think it's definitely both.
No one is excluded.
Yeah. But I'm more interested in the systemic side of things, just as a result of my own sort of history and where my ancestors and people come from. Knowing positions of power and ways to sort of influence and guide, that sort of thinking is something that I'm very interested in. But I'm interested in sort of justice at speed, right? Just like the pursuit of justice is, and this is not to undermine any of what has gone on before me. I would not be sitting here without what has been done before. But I'm also well aware of the energetic contribution that goes into these efforts and movements. I'm interested in how, and it's not speed with velocity. It's like, it's almost like justice acupuncture, right? Like, how can we find new meridians and pathways within systems where we can come in and fine-tune something to reestablish balance, right? Like, that's something that I'm very interested in, because I think that we're facing new needs now, right? Like 150, 200 years ago, well, the climate was already changing because we had gone past a critical mass. It just wasn't able to be spoken about globally in that sort of way. We now are facing it day to day, right? right? I think both of you spoke to it in what you had shared, and it's at an elevated rate where it's happening faster. So how can we scale these pursuits of systemic change to be more tactical with a broader sort of impact? And I'm also probably imagining my acupuncture session on Saturday right now, so it's probably where it's coming from a bit, but that's what sort of comes to mind.
Anyone else want to speak to it? If not, I have another question.
I mean, I'll speak to the system. I mean, yeah, because I just said you gotta convince people that some landscapes are worth saving. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a utility that's delivering electricity at the end of the day and trying to do that as cheap as possible. And that's where we can start to reimagine, like, cheap to whom? Who's benefiting from this? Is it really as cheap as the sticker price says when we start to consider all the other aspects? So systemic change is really, really critically important in thinking about our future of electricity, because, I mean, just what's played out in the last few years here in California with the basically the disassembly of the incentives for rooftop solar in the state. Right, and that means, you know, the less incentives we have to put on our rooftops here in the Bay Area and the Central Valley and all the other places that are also sunny. That means we're going to have to get more and more electricity from elsewhere. And just to give an example, so California's got about 20 gigawatts of utility scale solar. We've got also about 17 gigawatts worth of rooftop solar. Texas has about 20 gigawatts of utility scale solar and 2 gigawatts of rooftop solar. So that's a system, that's an electricity system that's designed very differently based on the incentive structures and power structures and all of that. And it profits different benefactors in that system as well. So I think system changes, especially when you're talking about utilities, you know, can convince you all to change your mind, but the utility is still this big powerful entity in the room, right? And that's the gorilla in the room in the states that I work in.
So that leads me to what I think will probably be our final question before we talk to the audience, which is, what can individuals do and what groups can they join if they find any of this interesting, engaging, they want to know more, they want to become more active, they want to understand it better? What do you advocate individuals do who might not be thinking about building a building or setting up a solar farm?
I can name some organizations. So if people are interested in thinking about or concerned about what they're seeing with Desert and Solar, is an organization called Basin and Range Watch that's been doing a lot of work on their board. They're very good. If you're interested in how to get more rooftop solar back into urban areas, there are groups working on that. I just was on the phone yesterday with the folks from Grid Alternatives, who run the low-income solar program for rooftop and commercial, not for rooftop and rooftop residential in California. And that's another great organization. And every one of you are either part of a utility or you pay a community choice aggregator. And community choice aggregators are increasingly the ones who are contracting for these renewables projects. And unfortunately, they're the ones who are, because they're being squeezed by PG&E and utility and trying to keep prices low, they're the ones that are going out into Nevada to buy solar for us here in San Francisco. And that isn't necessarily going to help us turn off our natural gas power plants. So tell your CCA to buy locally. Buy their power locally. Stop buying projects that are far away, because that's not going to help us get to our climate objectives possibly to lock in coastal natural gas power plants.
Thank you.
There you go.
Great. I would say sit on a park bench with nowhere to go and watch what happens. Slow down is such a hard thing to do. If you're willing to sit here, though, I feel like you're good at park benches already. There's a library in the building. We like to sit and read, right? But I would, for real, see what happens and go there several times to the same place that's your happy place and watch it change. I did wildfire research, and seeing a wildfire and then go back in a year and look how it changed, and then go back in a year and look how it changed, and see the progression of time in front of you, because it will awaken the part of you regardless. It will feed you. Whether or not you can change anything, it will feed you. So sit on park benches, that's what they're for. I would also say, if you live in a neighborhood where you have the privilege of having land, get together with your neighbors and do a challenge where you can change some of the land that you own to be more fun in a way that's healthy for the environment. You can clean the water a little bit more, you can do something with solar. But join your neighbors and make it a community event. And then also use your voice, because y'all, community meetings are so boring. And so if you are willing to sit there and do it, your voice will be heard, and that changes a lot more than just writing your local, politicians and everything. If you actually just go and put in the time, it really does change the code, which enables me to do a lot more. There's a lot of times where the sidewalk has to be this wide and there has to be this much, and so I can't put in a permeable pavement. I can't put in planting because your code requires it. So the more that you can go and do those little things where you make your voice be heard and you can think about what you'd say while you sit on the park bench.
Wonderful, thank you.
Nice. I'm going to riff off of the voice because I think it's great. I think our up-and-coming generations have a difficult task at hand because they keep getting inundated with the thing that's next. But the Sankofa part, it's the bird that's reached back to take the egg from the past to the future. It's an African proverb. That's what I mean, I'm going to pass judgment here, but it's also just knowing that we are in a space of storytelling, that each one of you has a unique story and experience and history that the upcoming generations must hear. To know how things have changed. For me, I'm speaking from my own personal experience when my father talked to me about how his Black community evolved and changed over the course of his time being there, where it used to be vibrant and full of life and energy and culture. But through migration and policy and redlining and all these things, that started to dissipate and fall away. And now the community is open lots with buildings that are falling apart on one side of the tracks, and on the other side of the tracks, it's big, beautiful homes with people who are the marks and traces are still there. But when my dad shared those stories with me, I was more equipped to understand my place in that story. So I think everyone here has a unique responsibility and opportunity to share about your experiences with the younglings. And I mean, I can still consider myself young, so I want to hear your stories too.
That's wonderful. So we have some concrete, and then we have some esoteric, and we have an opportunity and an invitation to sit on a park bench, which we don't get often enough, I have to say. And I'm going to take that one seriously. I live right near Dolores Park. I should sit there more often.
Great benches.
Yes, great benches, great grass.
Some lovely native flowers by like a driveway that I like to sit and stare at, but there's no bench.
No, but there's plenty of dogs, and that's also quite wonderful as well. So I want to ask the audience to do a little homework, and I'm going to ask audience members to think of an action they feel inspired to take as a result of what you've heard today, and share it with someone sitting near you. And then we're going to ask if anyone wants to share what they're thinking with the group. So we'll just take a few minutes and then we'll open it up. Laura will open it up for questions. So, I don't know, 2 minutes for people to think about what they would want to do as an action that you might be inspired by what you've heard or seen. Okay, we're going to ask you to come back and share your ideas. Who would like to come up and share their idea or their commitment? Do we have a taker to share an idea or an inspiration? Yes, in the back.
I have one that everyone could partake in. So this weekend in Oakland, there's going to be cleanups of several different parks that you can find available just on the internet. But Diamond Park from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Hope Collaborative, that is a fabulous food and climate justice group in Oakland, is going to be hosting a park cleanup there. So if you show up to Diamond Park this Saturday on Earth Day, anytime from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., we will be there. Picking up trash.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. Do we have any other ideas, commitments, engagement that you want to share? And then we'll have open mic for some questions. I heard a lot of conversation. Yes, please.
I mean, we just talked about an idea, and I wondered if you involved at all in anything like it. And I was commenting that when I was in college, when I came home, and my mom did recycling, and I gave her such a hard time. The next time I came home, she had like 20 different bins. I'm sure she was like doing fine tuning to the extent that the system could handle, but big leap forward. And I just said, I feel like I look at my nephew's daughters, and they're 7 and 10, they're so amazingly smart, and like really latch on to things. I said, you know, if you teach the kids some of these things at a young age, then they're like, where is it? And they demand it, and they grow up, you know, kind of expecting it to be there. And I find as adults, it really matters to you that you don't want to disappoint your kids, or you know, just kids.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I just wonder if there's a way, because they're obviously, you know, at the university level, and I know ULI, for example, does urban plan with high school students, and they have to learn how to do the interaction and negotiate and get a plan that everyone will buy off on at the end of it, which I think has a great deal of value kind of more broadly. But I'm even thinking reaching down younger would maybe make a big difference in not that big time frame. We're only 30. So I wondered if you know of anything like that, if you've participated in anything like that, because I think there could be a lot of value there. But yeah, it would be hard to do.
I want to add to that apparently 8-year-olds in the 2nd grade is the sweet spot when you want to get a child interested in environmental issues or social justice issues. And then they badger their parents about doing the right thing. So there's something about the 2nd grade. Right. And I know the Department of the Environment here in the city goes out to schools all the time and talks about environmental issues and helps to explain, understand, and goes to those elementary school students.
Oh, I just thought, have you ever done a tour with Tunnel Talk? They've got a great program with some of the schools, and one of the guys was telling me they had kids, and they came and they asked what lake it was when they saw the bag. These are kids that live in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So, and we have a really very developed program for a lot of the schools in the city. So I thought of that as we were talking, because I saw it last year, but I was very impressed with what they were doing there.
Do any of you have, can answer this question, and then we'll take other questions from people on the floor?
Well, I'll just say that I think it's a great idea. In fact, the last couple months I've been writing grant proposals to try to bring my students out into these areas to see the development, to be experiencing these places. Because I asked my own students how many people have been out in these places, and none raise their hand, because I'm teaching to a certain demographic that doesn't have the same mobility as people from the University of California and things like that. So I think you're spot on, and going younger, I think is even more powerful in happening. So great suggestion.
I think it also doesn't necessarily require like teaching. It's like firsthand experience, right? Through that sort of learning. One of the most magical things I think I've ever experienced in my life was when I plopped she was maybe 6 months old, she could just sit up. We plopped her right in the middle of the garden, and she just started eating everything, like without even thinking about it. It just was so natural. And now, like, we're out in the backyard, and she's got her like goldfish over here, and then we've got our sun-rolled tomatoes, like, you know, in full form. And she goes right to the tomato, like it's about she's already picking up on it. So I think it's, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-on like choreographed, orchestrated program. It could also be finding those soft touch points to sort of introduce them into the thinking. But I'm right with you, and it's definitely something my team has been thinking more about is going into the communities that are most impacted, either dealing with environmental racism or redlining, those who are dealing with the problems, and equipping them with the sort of tools to be able to start to address them, because those are the ones firsthand who really have the knowledge to help us all better understand what to do. So great thinking about all of it.
Well, you want to come in, actually, let's just take questions, and I'm going to borrow your microphone, and you share microphones. Okay. So do you have questions for the audience? Coming your way with the mic.
Hey there, everybody. This is Mike, and my name is Mike. I'm surprised I got a laugh, but thank you. Lara, you had mentioned that going to boring meetings can be an especially effective way of making your voice heard, perhaps more so than social media posting or other stuff that doesn't involve leaving your house. But I'm wondering, in all three of your opinions, which, for a person who doesn't have much extra time, which types of meetings, if I live in San Francisco, would be the ones where you could have the highest leverage as an individual making your voice heard? Is that Public Utility Commission? Is it land use meeting? Is it, doing YIMBY stuff, like about projects that some people might be against, but will really increase the density of housing and have very energy efficient things that some people might be upset about because of shadows? You could speak out in favor of those. So thoughts on that?
I would say go where you have time and energy to put in the sitting or the talking. It doesn't have to be, in some ways, a lot of communities need someone to volunteer and to be on the board. So offering your services or time, if you have it, is just looking and see what their postings are. I'm not as familiar with San Francisco legalities, but if you go and show up to any meeting and share your voice, or if you write any of your community members or set up a time to meet with any of them, or have them come meet with your neighborhood, it's better than not talking. So anything you do is helpful if you have the energy and the time to do it. It's a place that, it's one more thing that will be heard. So anytime you can do it, I would say it's helpful. I personally served on a board. I got roped into it because my mom wrote me into it. She's like, oh, the neighborhood needs a thing. And next thing you know, I was on a board meeting, and I was like, oh my God. But I sat there and I did it, and we did things, and it was cool. But it's definitely like, it's a commitment. So do what you can do.
I would add to that, if you're, depending on what neighborhood you're in the city, there's a lot of neighborhood community organizations, and they often at election time bring in people who are running for office, either the incumbent or anyone else, and that's a time that's usually an open mic where you can ask questions and share your concerns for somebody who at some point could or might be representing you. So that's another way to do it, and I think this city, every neighborhood has a neighborhood association. And you know, it's funny, I used to be a community organizer, and I would get my people to go to those meetings, and they were not boring when my neighborhood showed up. Let me just say that, they were not boring.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think it's important to go where you're passionate on the topics that you feel you're well versed in, that you have something to convey, because that will make you give you the energy to get there, a little bit too, and inspiration. So I don't think there's an easy answer. You hit the conundrum on the head, which is that it's really hard to get the public to participate in these things because we all have busy lives and things are just coming at us real fast sometimes.
Question in the front?
Question, but a comment first. I would also say that 250 SF and the San Francisco Climate Emergency Coalition have mailing lists when there are public hearings on climate issues. They will send you a notice. If there's a letter writing campaign, they will send you a notice with a draft text and you can weigh in. And they will let you contact directly your supervisor or whatever. So lots of ways to engage directly on a broad range of San Francisco specific issues. But it's local is where we have most influence. I had a question to all, I think all three of you, but it affects very differently depending on where you are. And this, Laura, you raised the issue of code constrictions on the restrictions on what can be done. And one of the things I'm concerned about is the issue of structural barriers. And an example on the utility side is San Francisco's, California's utility code was written when?
Which would be probably
the public
old
utilities
ones,
code.
over 100 years ago.
Over 100 years ago. And that restricts, for example, what can be done with energy. And what that means is I cannot share battery storage with the people on my block, which is a tremendously inefficient solution because everyone has to put in their own battery system. You're multiplying fire hazards, etc. You're multiplying costs, resource efficiency, yada, yada, yada. Building code issues, another structural issue. And then there is the commercial interests where, for example, USGDC has kowtowed to the chemical industry because of their threat to raise a competing green building organization. Do you have any thoughts on how to address these sorts of structural issues that really prevent systemic changes? We've got lots of opportunities for individual small changes, but systemic changes are more complex, and their codes and structural barriers are a big deal. And comments or thoughts on that?
Just your point about building codes resonated with me because if you look at residential rooftop solar and you were to look at a bunch of different municipalities and you were to measure how long it takes for them to approve whether you're allowed to be connected to your building code permit your building permit is approved for that rooftop solar varies tremendously from some places 2 years, some places a couple months. So I think in that sense, having some organization or entity help figure out ways to streamline and cast that across a broader landscape, maybe that's coming into the state to kind of require local codes to adjust to something that is resonating quicker. But that requires going against often political headwinds too. So I think that there are challenges, or even addressing the policy is really challenging because you have very powerful political actors. You have to be thinking about it on multiple levels, both dealing with the technical specifics about what you actually want to accomplish, but also organizing to push against the utilities or maybe it's the building trades industries that are making it hard clear, but, yeah, it's a major challenge.
Thanks for sharing both your thoughts and Mike. Great question. I am a firm believer in the power of coalition, right? It's like the lone zebra in the field is a target that anyone can see or any other animal can see, feels vulnerable, do I have a shot? But gets in with its zebra friends and family and all of a sudden, whoa, now I can't, whoa, there's something happening over there, I'm not, whoa, there's movement. So I'm a big believer in coalition. I think there are organizations and groups already out there doing a lot of this. So finding those groups and aligning with them and finding ways to support or seeing what your place might be, I see as a starting point. I don't think it's the only path. But also maybe in canvassing the groups that are out there, you find the groups that aren't out there and create your own coalition. I think the age of consensus is something, at least in the design field, that is being called into question more and more now, because I believe that it's more about aligning values and differences towards an effort rather than somebody saying yes or no. At the end of the day, somebody will have to say yes or no. But aligning with other zebras, I think, could be a place to start.
Sorry, I will add a little bit. I think it's important to debunk or to sort of deconstruct the systems that are exist. And so in landscape specific to land, it's really interesting to me that the Department of Agriculture controls all land. So I love that Deb Holland is up there as the champion now, because she's the first Indigenous person to have say over, oh my gosh, Indigenous land. But thinking about the Department of Forestry is managing forests, but their goal is timber by nature. Oh look, my niece is calling me. By nature of how it exists, that is the system that we work within. The Department of Agriculture, to your point about children and education, we don't know how to feed ourselves. But here we are with the Department of Education and Department of Agriculture that don't coordinate very well. So I think the systemic life that we lead is helpful to sort of pull back and say, when was this made? What did this jurisdiction come from? Because it starts to sort of, pull back the curtain and you're like, oh, wait a second, this is all just from a different mindset. I don't know how to fix it, but I think it's really interesting to start to see it differently.
Some of these things are really entrenched. Some of these things, I testified before Congress last fall on the 1872 mining law. That thing's over 150 years old. 150 years old. Those companies don't pay a dime for minerals they extract on federal lands. And that's something people have been talking about for 150 years, trying to reform that law, and it's just got, I think, systemic lock-in is very hard to overcome. And that's probably another gorilla in the room.
Any other questions?
It just occurred to me the whole concept of internships of young people at this critical transitional age, junior high into high school, where they're starting to think about college and professions, and they can see firsthand all the meticulous things that you do on a daily basis. That could really, really excite them, and then create, alliances with professionals. And I wondered if such internships currently exist.
You're hired to start our internship.
I can comment. This is going to come out maybe a little negative because of the way I'm going to frame that a little bit. I had saw that Stanford has this amazing program, which is that they have internships where they put students in state agencies. Cal EPA, Department of Toxic Substances Control, all of them. They have a list of like 25 different ones. And the reason I said that to open is that I wish that was available for San Jose State students as well, because it's not necessarily going to have the same impact. It's wonderful for Stanford students to have that, but I feel like if we want to tackle the equity problem, then we need to have more upward mobility, and we need to have somebody bring students from the Cal State system, for example, into these agencies as well. Because I think you're right, that they'll see people trying to solve problems in real time, and that will really inspire them to want to pursue those career pathways. And yeah, I think that's a really good point.
And in creating sustainable relationships between students and professionals such as you.
And the students will reshape the agencies in some ways, because they'll bring ones bringing is like, I don't know, Professor Mulvaney said what you're doing over there with those solar farms, not so great for the desert tortoises, so maybe we should think about a different strategy. So we need advocates from the inside as well as from the outside, and I think that bringing those two together is maybe a formula for moving forward.
Any other questions?
For everyone, including Karen. So, personally, outside of work, how do you sustain active hope?
I can answer that. So I've been an activist since 1982, and I sustain hope by acting in concert with others. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to help serve sandwiches to students who are with Students versus the Apocalypse in front of BlackRock, the investment company down in the financial district. Somebody else made all the sandwiches today. I'm going to hand them out to the students who are going to do civil disobedience, and we'll probably paint murals on the street in front of it to talk about their investment practices. So I sustain my hope by doing those collective actions with others. Sometimes I'm the one risking arrest, and I've done that countless places around this country and for many years, and that is another way in which I sustain hope. But tomorrow, I'm just handing out sandwiches to high school students.
I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, so it doesn't take very much to keep me motivated for moving things. And we made a tremendous amount of change. I mean, I think that's what's inspiring too, is that even in the past decade in my space, looking at solar development and all that, we are transforming an energy system, and we're seeing it. Now it just needs a little more guidance, and I think that that wasn't really considered a possibility 15 years ago or 10 years ago when I started. So I've seen a tremendous amount of change, and I think that that in and of itself is inspiring.
Y'all are so patient. I'm sure you're like, can I go home now and stop talking? I used to say in school that speak truth to power, go eat lunch. And it's such a neoliberal curse that we think we have to burn ourselves out to do good. But that is because we are disconnected and we don't have this community mindset. You raise your children alone, you die alone. It's not on you. When I lived in New York City, that's my hometown. Like, I remember one time I was going up the subway train and there was this guy who was just, I don't know, not in good shape. And someone saw him and picked him up and carried him 2 steps and then realized this guy's a mess and put him back down, and then someone else carried him 2 steps, and I just stood there and watched. I think I was on the phone, and I just watched the city itself carry him up like an anthill, and they just carried him up, and then he was okay, and he was out on the street again and not just sitting on the steps. And to me, that's the metaphor. Like, go have lunch, go sit on the bench, do what you can with your heart, but then also make time to just feed yourself, because it's not all on you, and if it is, that's our problem.
For me, personally, it's taking stock of everything that's happened before me to get me here, and knowing that my reality and future is the result of others before me hoping that I can have this. So when I look at my daughter, it's easier now for me to almost spring into action to do that for her. So I guess again, it's back to the stories and drawing this hope and inspiration from them.
Very good question.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank our incredibly inspiring guests and panel to get our feet on the ground and also to lift us up so that we can see the world around us, and to also inspire us into action, to activism, and to make changes in the world so that we can be stewards of our earth. Not the owners, but the stewards. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.